Recent protests around the country are putting a harsh light on a host of figures honored by public statues. One of them is Christopher Columbus, whose statue near the North End in Boston has been moved after having been vandalized. In recent years, Columbus has been a figure of increasing controversy, but for Italian Americans, he's long been a symbol of achievement and hope. To tell us about that part of the history and its possible future is an educator and publicist from the local Italian American community, Frank Mazzaglia. Thank you very much for being with us, Frank.
Delighted to be here.
Frank, I want to ask you about this particular statue. How did it get there?
It was actually put there with private money. A number of people in the North End of Boston and several organizations actually contributed to that organization. Some of the Knights of Columbus, the Dante Alighieri Society, the Sons of Italy, and a number of prominent people. Pan Donorama, whose parents owned the Post-Gazette, founded the Post-Gazette in the North End. A lot of the Langone family, a lot of really good people put a lot of money into that statue because they wanted it to symbolize discovery and the fact that it was an Italian from Genoa who came to America and introduced the New World to the Old World.
Well, I want to ask you about your life here, growing up, long before that statue was put together. What was Columbus for you? I mean, did your parents tell you things about him?
Oh, Columbus and the Italian people are just about inseparable. Italians are so proud of what he did. And the fact of the matter is, as we look on it today, we see a man who, because of what he did, millions of people discovered a land where they could have economic opportunity. Millions of other people discovered a land where they could escape from oppression in their old country. Columbus is so important to the Italian community that it almost defies description as to how tight the Italian Americans feel about Christopher Columbus. And also his life. His life itself was really very admirable. Despite what a lot of the modern revisionists say, Columbus was essentially a good man, a very, very devout man. He was in the Third Order of St. Francis, as a matter of fact. Because of Columbus, all of Latin America is Christian. And what they were before, certainly we hesitate when we think about people losing a culture, but actually they gained a culture because the old culture was actually barbaric. It consisted of cannibalism and a great deal of human sacrifice. And that changed. The missionaries changed that. One can argue about cultural clashes, but the simple fact of the matter is that their circumstances became much better as a result of Christopher Columbus.
Well, I want to ask you about the alternatives, because as you are well aware, I'm sure, there are many other great figures in Italian history, in Italian culture. It would be nice to put up statues to them as well, but given the immigrants who came here, these are people very poor, mainly from the south of Italy and from Sicily. Were they as plugged into that culture, or was Columbus just a totally different thing for them?
Well, there are a number of ways of looking at that, actually. But I think that Columbus is a unifier. It does make a great deal of difference whether you're a Sicilian or you're from Genoa, which is from the north, which is where Columbus actually came from. He's a uniting factor with all Italians, actually. And so from that perspective, we perceive of him as the first immigrant, and an immigrant who struggled, just as Italian Americans have struggled. I mean, there has been a great deal of bigotry and persecution the Italian Americans have faced. And in many ways, we liken ourselves to the struggle of Columbus. There are things we have in common. I happen to be a Sicilian, and I admire the man from Genoa.
So in other words, he's the first Americanized Italian.
And indeed he is. He never got to the United States, which is why I sometimes question why there are people worried about that Native Americans are concerned, but he never got to the United States. He was always in the Caribbean and in Latin America and that sort of thing. So sometimes the opposition there confuses me. I don't understand where it comes from. Columbus, after all, is accused of two things, primarily. He's accused of genocide. Now, genocide is a deliberate act. It's what the Turks did to the Armenians, what the Nazis did to the Germans, the Nazis did to the Jews. But for all practical purposes, genocide is not something that is an unintentional clash of microbes. It was terrible, but it was an accident. It was not deliberate. It was not intentional. And the other accusation about Columbus is that he introduced slavery. Slavery came into existence at the dawn of time. And for all practical purposes, we know from our history that Indians had enslaved each other for hundreds of years before Columbus ever left Spain. And so these things are blatantly false. And how do you combat things like this? Well, we were fortunate because last year, a very good book came out, Mary Grabar, Debunking Howard Zinn, which is the catechism that people have learned for the past 30 years. And it's taught in the schools, a people's history of the United States, which accuses Columbus of all these things. And Mary Grabar found that in order to advance his Marxist socialist agenda, the Zinn actually lied and actually took entire passages out of Columbus's journal and created misinterpretation.
I did check out the narrative from another book that was published about 9 years ago. And there are some good things about what Columbus did in this hemisphere, but there are also some things that look pretty disturbing. To me, it seems like there ought to be a conversation between different people with different points of view about that.
Yes, it's true. But I think when, in fact, the truth comes out, one of the things that he probably could have been a lot better at is he could have assigned roles to better people. And some of the people in the assigned tasks did not do their jobs very well. But you have to remember, the people who thought that the world was flat were not going to be easily recruited onto those ships. The sailors that were employed on those cruises came out of the prisons. And their choice was, you want to stay in prison or you want to take a chance in your life. And so these were not the best people that you could have had on a cruise like that. And that's part of the problem. They were not the best people in the world that he had to deal with. And it's unfortunate. But all of the evidence is that he himself was not involved in any of those atrocities that apparently he's accused of.
Well, speaking of which, how did you feel when you saw the news about the statue here being decapitated?
Well, we were very angry, but we were angry on two fronts. First of all, because the statue was decapitated, but secondly, because in a circumstance that we're going through right now, which is calling for racial equality, racial understanding, to have one ethnic group attacking another ethnic group was to us hypocritical. It was not in the spirit of the times. And we resent that. A sign, Black Lives Matter, was left by the destroyed statue. But you know, we're not taking that very seriously because, you know, if you rob a bank, you're not going to leave your wallet behind. So we don't know whether or not that's true or not. If it was, I think it's a terrible thing. But giving people the benefit of the doubt, let's say that we don't know who did it. However, destroying that statue is a hate crime, and we want to know whether or not the city is going to be serious about investigating who did it. We want to find out who these perpetrators were, and we want them charged, and we want justice done. In the interim period of time, we are expecting a meeting with the mayor sometime towards the end of this week. at which time we will have representatives of the people who actually paid for that statue. And then we'll see what the situation is with the mayor and whether he wants to return it or not. We would like it returned to its original place there at Columbus Park, with one addition, and that is proper security and proper cameras so that this will not happen again. This is not the first time that that statue has been destroyed. And we want to be sure that if it goes back to where it was in the first place, which is what the stakeholders want, the people who pay for that statue, that's what they want. But if that's going to be the case, then we need proper protection around it.